Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the third webinar in the series of webinars by the Land Information Council of Jamaica, being executed by the National Spatial Data Management Branch. Today's topic will be how to make maps. My name is Walter Williams, and I'll be your presenter for this morning. We're starting promptly at 10 o'clock because we want to get through this within the hour. Thanks for those who have joined already, and we look forward to others joining us as we go along. I'm going to ask that if you have questions, you feel free to put those in the chat, and we will take those at the end of the presentation. So this, as I said before, is the third in a three-part series. This is the final one. Miss Simone Lloyd and Miss Nadisha Poiser did the two previous webinars, and the first one was an introduction to the ArcGIS online platform, and the second one was how to configure ArcGIS dashboards, and this one is about how to create maps. You have our contact information on your screen. If there's any information that you require about the webinars or about geospatial development across Jamaica, you can contact us through the various various media available. So you can follow us on social media, or you can send us an email, and you can check our website. So just a little bit of background on the National Spatial Data Management Branch. It is a secretariat for the Land Information Council of Jamaica, and our mission is to coordinate the development of the geospatial industry in Jamaica through the promotion of geospatial tools and their utility, and for the promulgation of standards and procedures that help to drive the industry forward and to improve what we're doing here locally as it relates to GIS and geospatial data collection and dissemination. We have over 50 government and quasi-government and private organizations across Jamaica using spatial data and GIS technology. A majority of them have been using the ArcGIS platform, and the council has responsibility with directing the policy direction of the geospatial industry as it relates to how we manage spatial data, who are the owners of it, and the custodians, and so on. So there's quite a bit of work that has been done, and we continue to work on this mandate, and we hope, in the near future, to have a policy document that will guide that kind of development for Jamaica. So into what we're discussing today, we'll be looking at what are maps, what is the purpose of a map, some examples of good maps versus some examples of bad maps or poorly created maps, do's and don'ts of map making, color balance and scheme, which is quite integral in the map design process, map elements, and then we'll have a demonstration session just to show some of the things or some of the procedures that we use in ArcMap to create a map. And then we have a question and answer section, and you guys feel free to ask questions there, and I'll take them at the end. All right, so I have a quote here from Esri. It says, "Maps are more than diagrams that help you navigate from point A to point B. They are windows into information that allow us to explore our world, to understand it better, and to engage with it more productively." I agree with this quote. I think that maps are not just diagrams anymore, but there's a lot of information that can be put in maps, and with the advent of the internet and web-based maps, there's a lot more that is being done with maps than just navigation. So navigation is now one component of what we use maps to do, but maps have a broader application across our culture and across the space that we're in. So what are maps? So maps can be simply defined as graphical representations of the real world. So a map is just showing you what is, representatively of what exists in the real world. It's always an abstraction of reality, so it doesn't really, it's not the world itself, and it cannot demonstrate what is actually there, But what maps do is that they use symbols to represent features, which kind of paints a picture for us of what is there in the landscape. The world is too big for us to fit it into any map, and so there are some trade-offs that we normally have to endure, and so maps have this science background to it because we've taken the real world and kind of smushed it onto flat paper, and that in itself has implications for how features are represented. And so projections are important because they allow us to take the world and then represent it on a piece of sheet with features that show us where they are in the real world. And that's a part of the science. And then the art is now, how do we show that using colors and symbols so that the map reader can actually identify what it is that we're trying to show and communicate with the map. So an example is of a map that takes the real world and kind of smushes it onto a piece of paper is topographic maps. And some of those can show you the 3D elements of the world. It shows not just lat and long, but it does show the elevation values. And so you get a kind of 2D, or it reduces the 2D stuff and then gives you a 3D rendition of the environment. So you're able to see using contours or using a DEM what the elevation looks like and what the relief of the land could look like. So is it steep sloping, or is it gentle sloping, and so on. So yeah, so a map takes the big picture and kind of gives you a summarized version of it, so that you have some idea of what's happening in the real world. Continuing on what maps are. So the art of map construction is called cartography, and I think a lot of us would already know that. Maps have a long history in our different cultures, and if you can just think back in medieval times, the maps used to say, beyond this point there be monsters. And so a lot of maps were created, and they were more artistic than science-based, but there was still an element of science behind those. The earliest maps, the main goal of those were to communicate information. So it's not just to have a pretty picture to post on the wall. Really, maps are about communication. It should relay something to the map user or to the audience, whoever it is that will be receiving the map. And so there are some things that you have to consider, in order to be able to effectively communicate stuff to whichever user you have. So maps became more objective in the dawn of Western science, and with the increased utility of science-based methods in GIS. So that would, that we have GIS, which is Geographic Information Systems, but we also have Geographic Information Science, and the science part of it has driven how now maps are being created and the objective nature behind it. And so I think we fluctuate often between trying to get that balance right, where the map is not just science-based and metrics representative, but it also is artistic and aesthetically pleasing, so that people who are looking at the map can see it as not just a beautiful map or not just a very, very technical map, but something that is in the middle. So today in map making, sometimes it can be quite sophisticated, and it's now based on computers. Back in the day, people used to have a lot of hand-drawn maps, but a lot of the maps now are being created by computers and then printed by plotters or through printers, and so you have a printout of those maps. But usually back in the day, it was really hand-drawn, and you had to have quite a bit of calligraphy skills as well to write the labels on and so on. So map, I think it is more sophisticated in terms of the science of it, but the tools that we now use have allowed it to become a lot more simple, and you don't necessarily have to understand all the science behind it in order to make a good map. So what is the purpose of a map? So as we're explaining, as I was talking about earlier, A map really is just a visual representation of the Earth, and it is scaled and is very generalized mostly. Its main objective is to show where things are in relation to other things. So for example, if you needed a map to navigate you from one location to another location, you'd need to know what's your origin, and then you need to know what your destination is, and then you need to see the routes along that particular map that will take you to your location. And modern maps are becoming almost indispensable. Almost all apps that you use nowadays are asking for you to share your location information because people are interested in mapping where their users and clients are. And I think the main purpose of maps is communication. So maps are a communication tool, and if you're not communicating clearly to the users of the map, then I think the map would not have served the purpose that it was intended for. So the biggest and the main purpose, I think, for maps, and I mean this is just strongly my opinion, is for communication. So the reason why we put maps in presentations, the reason why we put maps in reports, is not just so that we have a graphic or so that we have a map, is to help with the communication, to help to make our points and to bring across what it is that we'd like to share with the audience. All right, so I have here a slide of the importance of maps, and I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to go through a few. Yeah, so maps are a blueprint of our history. I think those maps that show the times of the Dark Ages and some of the maps that maybe Columbus had to use in navigating documents our progress as a society, as a civilization, how the world has become smaller as we know more about it, but still remains a lot undiscovered. So I think it helps to document our history in that it shows where people were and how they've progressed in their knowledge of the Earth. I think maps also, number one, says maps simplify complicated information, and I think that's also true. A picture, we say it says 1,000 words, so I think maps as images that are put into documents or are put for display somewhere helps to give people a visual, an idea of what actually exists in the real world, even though they're not seeing the real world features. Yeah, so I'll just do 9 and then I'll move on. So it says maps give stories context. So I mean, a lot of times you can imagine trying to give somebody a direction, especially in rural communities. That might be a little bit tedious, but if you actually have Google Maps or if you have coordinates and you're able to navigate using some map feature or some map tool, then it gives your story context in terms of what is it that you're trying to do. How does that relate to other features on the ground? And if you're showing what you're doing to other people, the ability for them to see a map and to have an idea of the location component, I think gives a spatial context. So it's not just, it doesn't become abstract to people anymore. They're thinking of a real place where there's these features that you're representing on your map actually exist. All right, so I want to look at some examples of good maps versus bad maps. And I wanted this to be a little bit interactive, so I'm going to show you 2 maps side by side, and you can put in the chat whether you think the map is a good map or which one you think is a good map versus which one you think is a bad map. Oh wait, we're not there yet. Okay. Right, so we have these examples coming up. So I think that slide is at the wrong place. So let's go back. Sorry about that. All right, so we're just going to 10 things to consider when you are going to create a map. So I think the first thing is you want to look at the geographic context. Where is this location that you want to create a map for? For example, if you're considering to make a map of Jamaica, Jamaica is wider than it's long. So in thinking about that will help with some of the design concepts. What sheet of paper would you want to create that on? How would you, what is the orientation of the paper and so on? Then you have background data elements, which really is stuff that give your data context. So for example, if you're creating a map of settlements, you may need road networks to show why there might be some settlements in a particular area and why there isn't any settlement in another area. But if you can see how people travel, and that is usually determined by relief, then you can see why it is possible that there is no settlement in some areas, because these areas are probably not very easily accessible, or these areas are defined as protected areas and so on. So your background elements give context to your map as well, but they're normally not the main feature. The third thing you want to consider is how you're going to symbolize your data. So you want to look at the types of symbols that you use, and you want to use symbols that are very easily identifiable. So if somebody is looking at the map, they'll be able to, from the map elements, very quickly be able to ascertain what the map is about and what it's trying to communicate. Then you have labels, which identify your features. You have other background data elements, which are like the colors of the symbols, the metadata for the data that you'll be using, the grids that helps to give the coordinates and provide some spatial context for people who may not be very familiar with the region that they're looking at. And then you want to incorporate map elements. You want to ensure that the elements that you include are those that are standardized, so like a legend or a key, your title, logos if you're representing an organization, north arrow to give directional context to your data, and so on. So there are some things that you still need to incorporate as a part of a map, and I think from the LICJ and SDMB standpoint, we want to say that maps are not complete if they don't have all the adequate map elements, and so we're going to go through those in a short order. So metadata is important to maps because they also give context to the reader. Sometimes it is based on the context that somebody will be able to understand what it is that you're trying to communicate on the map, and if they're not able to see the data and the metadata that's attached to the data, maybe like our catalog or so on, then they would need to have some context. And I think adding the metadata to your map, indicating your data sources and so on, indicating when the map was created, is a big help to people who are looking at the map, because then they can know whether or not the data they're looking at is recent or if it's not, and then they know how to interpret the stuff that's on the map. Map layout is important as well when you're considering the map, because that gives, again, just organization to the map. It helps people to see how the elements have been arranged, and in some ways that makes it easier for you to read the map, and then also to separate elements into different areas of the paper. So you have to consider that the paper is really what the map is going to be printed on, and how you want the map elements to fit on that paper is important as well. Your locator map, which is like an inset, gives a broader context. So if you are doing, say, for example, a map on a particular parish in Jamaica, you want to give like a map that shows all of Jamaica, so that persons who might not be familiar with the region or familiar with Jamaica would know which parish this is. Right, so you want to get, sometimes you'll create a map and you'll think that's the greatest map you've ever seen, but I think it's good to get feedback on your maps, and that you can do that with your peers. And I think if you're doing published work, then it's good to also get that from not just people you know, but people who are external to your organization or external to your, you don't know them, and so they'll probably be a little bit more objective, because they're not concerned about hurting your feelings or anything like that. So it's good to also get the opinion of others, to look at maps and We have a forum here, Carted Talk, and you can use that one to get feedback on maps that you've created. And usually that's very helpful because you may not recognize based on your own personal bias when you're looking at the map you've created that there might be some difficulty in what you're communicating to people outside of, you know, you and people who immediately will understand very quickly what you're doing because they're familiar with the data. So it's good to get external eyes on your maps. All right, so now we're to the good and bad examples. I would say that the map showing, I think this is the state of Florida with the census tracts. I think this is a good map. You know, it's missing some of the typical map elements, but in comparison to the population trend maps for the US, that map is a little bit more difficult to read in terms of the color coordination and so on. It's not very easy to identify how the data changes across the different states that we're looking at. So I would vote for the Florida map in this one. Just would want them to include a little bit more of the map elements. All right, again, this map of the world with the labels is a little bit confusing because of how the labels are arranged, and you know they're covering some of the data, and so you can't really read this map very clearly. And again, some of the map elements are missing, and so I don't like that yellow color. I think it makes it difficult to read the map. You know, it kind of obscures your vision of that map. And then this map of income by state, the inset map is not very well done because of the many variations of colors that we're looking at. And so again, these two maps are bad because you're not able to identify what exactly either one of them is trying to communicate. So even though this one with the map of income by states has some map elements, the map layout is not very well done either, and so you know we have a lot of white space around the inset map, and the inset, the locator map at the top is it's not well placed either, and it doesn't fully capture the area that they are looking at as well. So both these maps are not very good examples. All right, again, so the one with the many dots, again, that's a little bit difficult to read because of just how much data is on the maps. I think that's something that we also have to consider when creating maps. You don't want to put too much information on one map. It's probably better to have two maps that are very clear than to have one map with too much data, and then the features start to crowd each other. This map with reading and writing and earning money is a little confusing as well. So I like the ones that are the smaller maps that have the gradient color, because those are easier to understand. But I think what they've done is they've smudged all of them together to try and get an overlay of all of them into this one map. But this also looks a little bit confusing because of the wide range of colors. So I think what we need to do when we're considering map creation is to use a smaller number of colors so that it is very easy to identify what a particular color represents. So the one with the dots, I would say that one is bad, and I think this one with the reading and writing and earning money map, that one I think needs a little bit of improvement. All right, so I think this one for Mauritius is very good. The labels are set in a particular way that they're not crowding each other. The labels are pretty clear. The inset map is properly laid out on this map. I think that the color scheme is appropriate because it's elevation, so the gradient, even though there are many colors, you can actually see the differentiation in the colors. So I think that's not too bad. The water features are labeled blue as well, so that's good. And the smaller islands are labeled properly, and there's a scale bar. So this has the map elements. I don't see a north arrow, but I'm assuming that some people are when they're designing maps, they assume north is up, and so they don't normally include north arrows. All right, so this is a map that we've created at NSDMB. We try to incorporate all the map elements. We have some yellow here. I think maybe we could have done a little bit differently, the color scheme for the raster that is being shown, and maybe we could also generalize this a little bit more. So even though it has all the elements and the labeling is there and so on, I think that the color, the choice of color here could have been improved somewhat. Yeah, again, this map of Egypt, I think this is quite well done. The labels are clear as well. You know, some of them are obscuring some of the features, but that's typical, especially so you see it in the Cairo area, but that's typical because those areas have a higher concentration. But the other features that are on the map are labeled and symbolized properly, so that you can see what they are, and then the label, the legend at the or the key at the bottom there gives a good idea of what we're looking at. Again, we have grid lines in here, but they don't obscure the features. They're sort of behind the features, but they still give you some kind of spatial context here as well. So this map on major routes and communities in relation to supermarkets in Portmore. I think this is also very good. The color combinations are work well, and I mean, the labels for the points are a little bit they're not so clear because of the, I'm not sure if it's the pixel quality of this image, but they don't seem as clear. But the main things that are being shown on the map stand out very well from the background. So the background elements, and you can see the roads are in gray, but you know they don't obscure the things that we want people to focus on. And it has the map elements as well, so north arrow labels are pretty clean, and there's a scale bar, and there's some metadata in terms of the data sources and so on. So that's I think that's a pretty good map. So I think both these maps do well in showing what they're trying to communicate here. All right, again, I think these two maps are well done as well. They have all the map elements in the one for wetlands across Jamaica. While this National Geographic map does not have lots of things that explain what this map is about, I think it is, if you look at where we probably got it from, the context, it would be explained there. But I think the reason why I want to show this map is to show that the variation in colors can be used very effectively when we're using these, when we're looking at extreme cases of a phenomenon. So we're looking at more cases as being very red, and as you look at the map, you can actually see that, and that makes sense in our minds as we look at this map, that red seems to be a problem, and blue seems to be where we're not having a problem. And that's easy for somebody to look at and identify based on the scale that is at the top. So I think that the choice of color here and the contrast of the blue versus the red is very well done here, I think. All right, so let's go through some do's and don'ts. So making maps can be quite hard and demanding. They tell us more about the world than we realize. I think what we really should focus on is that maps should be intuitive, meaning as you look at the map, it should be very easy to identify what the map is trying to show. It should be easily read, meaning the label should be clear, and what you want to be prominent should be prominent, and I think maps should be appropriately symbolized, meaning you should use colors and symbols that are representative of the features that you want. The NSDMB is working on a symbologies document, something that we want to be sort of authoritative through government, so that the maps that come out from government offices have a similar look in terms of their symbology. So we're still working on that because there are quite a lot of options that are available if you're using ArcMap for different features, but we want to sort of pick features that we think are representative internationally of a particular feature. so that we can all make maps that look quite similar. So now we're at the do's and don'ts. So I think one of the things you want to do is pick the right base map. So the do's, I'll go through the do's first. You want to create a map that is clean and simple and organized. You want to avoid too many color variations. You want to avoid piling on too much data on the map. And you want to ensure that the data that you're using is current, or as current as you can get. Don't include just throwing all the data on the map and trying to figure out how they fall. And to clutter your map with too much information, so that can be either too much text or that can be too much data. You want to pick colors that are distinct when you are trying to make comparisons, so like blues and reds to make a comparison is very good. And you want to use the right scale, so you don't want to be using the wrong scale for the data set. So for example, if the data was collected at a particular scale, then trying to use a much smaller scale is not going to accurately represent what you're doing. And you don't want to exclude critical map elements because they're part of communicating what you want the overall map to show, especially the metadata components and your key or legend, so that people who are looking at the map can interpret it using those tools. All right, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about color balancing, because that I think is part of the challenge for a lot of us. So color is one of the first things that is brought to the attention of an end user. We sort of have an intuitive understanding of color. So red means danger. It's not always clear to map makers though which color should be used to best convey the purpose of the product. And so you should spend a little time considering what the colors are going to be that you're going to be using to symbolize features, whether it's a raster or a vector data set, based on what you're trying to communicate. So for example, when we're creating flood hazard maps, we'll use blue because it makes sense, but we use deeper blues for the areas that would probably be more at risk, and lighter blues for the areas that would be less at risk. So this map is showing solar irradiance, and it's showing that when you look at this map, it is very intuitive that the areas that are darkest red would probably be the areas of highest solar irradiance. And so the further you go away from southern United States and start to go north, you realize that you have less irradiance there. And that makes sense based on what we know in terms of the climate and weather conditions that persist in these areas. Right, so still on colors. So these are just some examples of how to use colors. You want to use sequential colors when you're trying to show stuff like population change and create chloropleth maps. You want to use divergent schemes when you're doing comparisons, and when you're trying to show unique features, you use this what we call a qualitative scheme. So those are applications for those who want to understand how to use different color schemes in their map creation processes. All right, so I just want to go through these map elements really quickly. So there's a title, there's a data frame, there's a north arrow, there's an inset, there's a map symbology, scale bar, and the citation, which really is like a metadata. Other things that we haven't really labeled here is just the logos and the grid reference stuff that's around. But that's part of the data frame. So the data frame gives you an idea of the location of, when you add the grid to it, the location of the area that you're looking at in terms of its coordinates. But that is the focal point of the map because it houses all the data. So the data frame is basically the container in which the data resides. The legend or key, depending on how you symbolize your feature, helps people to understand your map. So it gives them an idea of what exactly each feature, each type of symbology is representing on the map. So as you can see here, There are different symbology that is representing, and so this would be a key. A legend will be like a color scheme, a color scheme ramp that we were looking at earlier. And so it's I mean, people use the terms interchangeably, but just for those who would like to know, key represents really just specific symbology or specific features. So the title is important. Sometimes if people are including maps in documents, they tend to not include a title because they know they will include a caption that then explains what the map is about. So again, this really is dependent on your audience. But map titles are important because they give an idea to the reader what exactly they're to expect when they're looking through the map. North arrow, this is just a directional tool. It tells you where north is based on where data is and so on. I think when people are creating maps for the southern hemisphere, they're more interested in knowing where south is, and so I mean north arrow may not be the term that they would use to describe it, but they're predominantly concerned about where the south pole is. And then you have the scale bar, and you can use different scales in your map. You can have a statement scale or a representative fraction scale if you want, but usually and largely people use, more popularly people use a scale bar. And then you have the citation, which really talks about when the map was created, who is the creator of the map, and the sources of the map, and sometimes includes the coordinate system that is used to create the map based on the data sets. Other element that we can include is a boundary line or a neat line that can sometimes it makes the map look a lot neater. And then you have an inset to provide context, especially where data, if you're focusing on an area and the data in that area is quite dense, then I think sometimes the inset helps to give a different kind of context. So it helps to give a different scale that allows for the data not to be crowding each other when you're looking at it. All right, so the steps in making a map. So it involves compiling the data sets that you need, considering the design concepts like the color and the layout, and then you export the final product once you're satisfied with what it is that you've created. All right, and so there's a demo video, and I'll just be going through some of the steps of creating a map. So the first step is to add all the data that you'll be using for the map. This gives you an idea of how what symbols you may need to use, what's the type of data that you're focused on, and so on. So the first data set that I will be, well, you have to switch to the layout view. And when you switch to the layout view, the layout toolbar becomes available to you. As you can see, there are some guidelines that I have included in the map, and this helps with your map layout. So you can apportion the paper based on the data that you're looking at. And so what I've done is I've created a space for the map itself and the data that we'll be looking at. And I've created a space below that for our other map elements. I'm using the zoom tool here to use as much of the paper as I can for the map. So it's almost at the edges of the parish boundary are touching the edge of the map. And then I'm choosing a color based on what I want to show. So I've used white because white is a good, almost like a canvas for the other data sets that we'll add on top of the map. So now I've added the labels for each parish, and then I'm changing the symbology for the layers, for the labels, sorry. I'm using Calibre, and I'm using small caps so that the labels don't seem so imposing. And I'm increasing the character spacing so that it's easier to read when you're looking at it. So I'm using Calibre, and I'm changing the size to 12. Yeah, and I'm also changing the color to like 50% gray because this is not a dominant feature, so I don't want it to be taking up a lot of the map. I use a halo as well because that helps with the labels blending into the background, and that's a good technique to use whenever you realize that your labels might not be very clear when you're using on map. So right, so we've symbolized the layer and added the labels, and realized that Manchester is just too big for the parish. It's stretching over into Clarendon, and so we want to format that a little bit. So what I've done is just made the text a little smaller so that Manchester will fit into the parish boundary. You'll realize that we can't see Kingston because it's been obscured by the feature, and so I'm going to move that. But in order to move it, what I'm going to do is convert labels to annotation. Before we do that, we add a transparency. And you'll see why I've done that in short order. Right, always remember to save your maps. It would be very disheartening for you to have gone all the way through and created your map, and then for some reason ArcMap crashes, and so we know that that's something that tends to happen from time to time. And so I'm encouraging you guys to save your maps as often as you can. So now we're converting the labels to annotations. This is so that I can have more control over the labels. So I've moved Kingston out a little bit into the Caribbean Sea, the label. Now I'm adding a line so that I can show what that label is representing. Also want to change the color of the line so that it matches with the elements that we already have on the map. Because again, this is not a dominant feature, so I don't want it to become too dominant in the map itself. All right, so we're going to symbolize our road features. That's the second step that we're doing here. Want to symbolize it by category. I'm going to choose the class field. Add all the values. Realize we only have 4 values, but I didn't want to have 4 different values, so I've merged class C and metro roads, and I've called that class other roads, so I can change it here. So note that this doesn't change anything in terms of the values in the attribute table. It just changes how these are represented here in the labeling, and then I'm gonna add some different colors. Also, I'm going to change the line width. So I'll do the same thing for class B. The colors I've chosen are not typical of road features, but this is basically a base map I'm creating in order to show some other data. So I want to try and keep the roads as obscure as possible. So I'm not using any dominant colors like red or any other color like that. So I'm using this gold and gray. All right, so now we look at the map. You can see that the roads have become less dominant to an extent, but the gold lines are still pretty prominent, so we're going to do something about that. Before that though, we want to address something which is called the symbol level. So we want to look at how these layers are drawn. So we want class A roads to be more dominant than any other road, and so we change how it's drawn. And so if you realize, again, you probably won't realize from this image, but what has happened is that when the shapefile is being drawn, the priority will be given to the higher class road, so the first class A road, sorry. Okay, so what I've also done here is I've put the roads below the parish boundary, and that's why I had added the transparency to the parish boundary because we did not want the roads to become a feature that was prominent. So you can't see a lot of the minor roads very clearly, but that's fine. We're gonna fix that soon. But the point is we wanted the main thing to stay the main thing. All right, so now we're on to the settlement data, and we're symbolizing this by graduated symbols. And we have some predefined classes, so 10,000 and below, and then 10,000 to 100,000. And I won't change the last figure because we just want anything that is above 100,000. So the highest population we have is at 500,000 plus, but we don't need that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the label here to say greater than 100,000. All right, so you can see that these have been symbolized by their different sizes, but I want to choose circles because I don't like the diamond symbology there, and I want them to be blue. So I've changed the symbol. I'm using blue, and I realized that some of my features are too small, so I'm going to change the size. And that looks like it's better, so I'm okay with that. Now I realize that some of my labels are being obscured by the data. Okay, so we're just going to save here and gotta fix some of these things. So what I want to do is label my settlements. As you can see, the labels are pretty overpowering here, and so I want to do something about that. So I'll just change the properties for the labels here. Again, you want to use a standard text. You don't want to use too many different types of text on your map because then that can affect how it looks. And so I'm changing these labels to about 4. I'm formatting these to small text, or small caps, sorry. And I'm adding character spacing to this as well, so they're easier to read again. I'm adding a mask again because it just helps to make it distinct from the background. I'm changing the color of the text. It's going to be gray again. 50% gray. Right, now it seems that we can't see. But we're going to adjust these a little bit. So let's zoom into the page itself, not to the data, and realize you can see it. It's just that they're not the main thing either in terms of the labels. It's the data that we want to symbolize in a particular way. So we can actually convert these to annotations and then we can fix them again. So that's what I'm about to do here. Again, converting these to annotation gives you more control over the text. You can move those around as you want. So what I'm doing here is I'm selecting the parish capitals and I'm making those more prominent because they're more important towns than the other surrounding towns. But then that will also give those who are looking at the map an idea of what's the population distribution for some of these parishes. So you realize, like, for example, let's see, in most cases the parish capitals have the highest population for that for a particular parish. But then you can also very easily start to compare which parish capitals have the highest population. And as you can see, Montego Bay, Spanish Town, halfway through, and Kingston. But then you have Portmore, which is another parish capital, which has a very high population as well. And then you have Hayes, and Santa Cruz actually has a higher population than Black River. So there are some inferences they can start to derive by just looking at the map and seeing how it has been symbolized with different elements. So I'm moving around the labels because, as you can see, in some areas it's a bit more cluttered than other areas, and so we just want to create some clarity for the users. So if you're reading the map, again, one of the things that the halo does is it allows you to move the feature around, the labels around, without it impeding some of the other features. Or sorry, without it being affected by the other features. So that was a warning message that one of my annotations did not convert, and so I'm gonna have to fix that shortly. But let's add the other data set first and symbolize that. So these are forest reserve areas, but as I was saying earlier, sometimes the data can give you an idea of what's happening in a particular area. So a lot of these areas that we see that will come up as forest reserves, we realize that there's not a lot of settlement or any major settlement in these areas because in some instances they're protected, and in other instances they just are not suitable for habitation. So people don't live there because it's just difficult to live there. But as you can see, just these 4 layers, I've symbolized them. I've given our map, you know, it's starting to look like a map. All right, so what I'm adding here is just some labels for some of these for these forest reserves. So it's another way that you can actually fix the map, and I'm going to symbolize that as well. So I'm going to change it to calibre. Should I text of choice, and I'm just going to make it a little smaller, and I'm going to change the color so it can be a little bit more representative of the areas that it is representing. So again, this is not overpowering, and it's not a main thing in the map, and so it's not, when you look at the map, it does, even though you're able to see it, it doesn't stand out significantly. So I'm doing the same thing for the Blue Mountain Range. And I could add areas of Portland Bight and so on, but in the interest of time, I didn't do that. All right, so we have had all the data added and we've symbolized them. So now we want to do some additional things. So I'm going to add a measured grid. I'm going to add the coordinates for that as well. So the reference system we're using is JOT 2001. But it seems like some of the data is not in that reference, which is why I'm getting this warning. So the way to fix that is to ensure that all of the data is in the same reference system. All right, so when you add the measured grid as a default, this is how it comes up. And you can notice that there are some zeros that are a subscript that's added, and then there are these ticks, and the lines are, the intervals are different for each axis and so on. So we're gonna fix those things now. So we go to properties, and the first thing we want to do is change the text to calibre. It's our text of choice. Make the text a little smaller and change the color. And we want to change the color for the lines. We want that to be gray, that's fine. Then we want to change the intervals. So we're gonna have 40,000 as the interval again for both sides. We want to take off all the major ticks. So we don't really need those. And then we're gonna remove the zeros that are like a bit funny. Click apply. Yes, we get this warning again. All right, so now we have grids that are the same on both sides. in terms of their interval. They've been labeled, and there's an offset of about 6, so you can see we're gonna fix all those things. So what you realize is that a lot of it is you try something and you see if it works, and then if it doesn't work, then you go back and fix it. So my grid references were falling off the page, and so we fixed that by bringing the stuff, the edges in, so that they match one of the neat lines, and then we use our zoom tool to adjust the extent of the map. So we're gone back now to the grid reference. So I think 20,000 is better, so let's try and see. And so we have, yeah, the grid. I know the grid seems like a bit overpowering, so we need to fix that. And so we change the lines to another gray, so that's not as dominant. So that's about 20% gray. Right, so now that doesn't look so bad. So now we want to adjust some of our the text that we realize are being impacted by the lines and the features. So the grid and the actual data is affecting some of these some of the labels, and so what we want to do is adjust those in a way that they're not interrupted by features or by grid lines where we can. So we won't be able to do that perfectly, but what we want to do is in areas that we can do it is to try and do it as best as we can. So try and minimize overlap as best as we can. So we try it's sometimes we're trying to figure out where is the best place to put this thing, so that it's not obscured by the features, and it gives the best read. Alright, so we just wanted to have a look at what happened based on what we've done so far, and this at this level, when you print the map, this is what you'll be able to see. And so the features look fine. Not seeing a lot of the minor roads though, but if you look close enough, you'll probably be able to see them. And we're trying to ensure that to the best of our ability, the labels and the lines from the features are not conflicting too much, and from the grid as well. Yeah, so it doesn't look so bad except in that Kingston area, so we're probably gonna need to fix it at some point. Yeah, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what it looked like close up. So it looks, from a distance, it kind of looks a little bit obscure, but when you zoom in, you can see that it's not as bad as it looks. All right, so what I wanted to know is add a few map elements, and with keeping in with the theme, the gray theme of most of the elements, I'm gonna make this 50% gray as well. We've added it, put it somewhere in the map, and then adjust that accordingly. So that's north arrow. Insert scale bar is next. So using kilometers, labels km, common letter because that's the SI unit for kilometers. I use measures that are easy to understand. So like half of 10 is 5. And I think it's more reasonable for people to understand 5 kilometers than something else. And then I use measures of 4 because in between those it's easy to identify what's in between. So I had a notepad file, text file with the title already, so I've just added that. So copy and paste. And so this sometimes I use a different text because I want this to stand out because this is the title. So I've done that here. Major settlements in Jamaica by population count. Would that to be bigger? This is prominent text. Yeah, again, we use quantitative all caps, but want it to be small caps. I'm adding some of the citation or metadata stuff now. So I typed this already, so I'm just copying it to this text box. Alright, and put that somewhere on the bottom of the page. But again, this is not a major element. We just want it to be there so that if somebody needs to see it, it's available to them. And so we symbolize that appropriately again. So it's calibre, size 10. And we've changed it to gray as well, keeping with the gray theme. Right, so put that at the bottom of the page. Still, it's too big, so we're gonna adjust the size again just to make it slightly smaller. Right, we're gonna add some logos. Right, so is a branding. You need to do that. And we're starting to organize the elements based on the space that we have left that's available. So I'm adding a legend. What I normally do is just go all the way through this process first, and then I come back and I fix this appropriately. Alright, so I'm gonna change the settings for this as well. So changing it again to calibre. Formatted this as small caps. Changing the text color to 50% gray. Alright, that looks a little better. Alright, so I want some data to be. I want to take out the title, so I don't need to say legend. I think people know that that's what that is. And then we want to remove some of the elements that are within the table that we don't need. So, for example, the heading in population, we don't need that. The layer name and the heading for roads. Just need to know what that is, and we're putting it in a new column. So just in that a little bit. Then I wanted point line polygon in terms of how the layers will be shown in the legend, and then we're putting the parish boundary and the forest reserved areas in a separate column. And to add class A roads, so it's not just saying class A, class B, but for clarity, people know that these are actual road features. Remove the underscore from forest reserves. All right, so one of the things I realized here is that we needed some space between the columns. So I'm just going to add some space and apply that. So each group of elements or sets of elements will look a little bit different in terms of it's easier to see them because they're not as jumbled together. All right, so it's more likely that some of these populations will be 0. In terms of the labeling, that's what we want it to look like. We want it to start at a random number that nobody knows. But it's very unlikely that the settlement will be 0, the population will be 0. But for the purposes of the map, we want to just not start at a random arbitrary number. All right, so we're putting a boundary around the map elements at the bottom. So you just add a rectangle and then you just make it transparent. Apply add a neat line so we can bring this a little bit higher to give some space around the elements. All right, so now we want to add some color to the background. So usually people use use blue to represent like the ocean and so on. So I'm using a slightly different color here because it allows some of the features to stand out a little bit more. I've pre-picked this color. That's why I know the numbers here. So I don't know it's at my head, but I just was able to pick that before. Right, and so now in contrasting, it allows for the map features to show a little bit more prominently. But what we've noticed is that for some of the so we changed the transparency because we're having too much of the green influence on the data, and we wanted it to be a little bit more white, so it would be more prominent. But what we realized as well is that some of the labels, the halo is showing up against that. So what we can do in order to solve that problem is to either remove the halo or change the halo to the color of the background, which both of those solutions I think work in allowing the color to stand out some more. Sorry, for the text to stand out some more, not the color. So I'm just going to change the halo to match the same color as the background. Right, and we have to do the same thing for some of the parish capitals as well. So I'm going to do that shortly. Right, so I inadvertently change the size. Let's change those back. Now we're going to do the parish capitals. So we're changing the halo for those as well, to the predefined color. And this is so that we don't have to move those. So the solution works. Yeah. All right, so the halo is a problem on the map itself as well. So we're gonna just change all of these. Change the halo for all of them. So this is done by just shift select. So you hold on shift and you just select multiple options on the map or features on the map. In this case, it's just annotations. So what I did here was I changed the size of the halo, and that made a difference in terms of the amount of white that you can see around the image itself, around the text labels themselves. So the wider the halo is the more prominent it will be. So just changing the size, as you can see with Mandible just now, really has a big impact on it. Yeah, so let's shift around the labels there just to make sure that they fit properly and you can see the features. So I missed some of the annotations here, so we're gonna fix those. Just looking through to make sure there are no additional ones that we're missing. And let's do the same thing, which is just to change the size of the halo. So as you can see, guys, sometimes you have to go back through some of the steps that you've done before just to make sure that you have everything very consistent. So, all right, so this is what map looks like now. What I'm gonna do here is to make the minor words a little darker so that you can actually see them. I'm saving the map here, and then I'm going to export it. So this is the final step. So we've decided on the data that we're going to use, added those data sets to the map, and we've symbolized them appropriately and labeled them. Added some halos to make the labels stand out from the background. Added the map elements, and this is what finished map will look like. So I've exported this as a PDF. I very well could have exported it as an image, but a PDF sometimes it's a little bit better quality than the image files. So I decided to use this. Alright, so that's the demo video in terms of how to create a map. So just in summary, maps are a mixture of art and science, or map making is a mixture. I guess the product, which is a map, is a mixture of art and science. Maps are essential to everyday life. Right now, they are very indispensable. We use maps almost for everything, location information, for a lot of things. The purpose of maps is to communicate information. And in the design of maps, one must consider the following, which is audience, map layout and configuration, types of data, and types of symbology and color schemes that we will use. So thanks for attending. And if you have any questions, I will just check the chat to see. Just so that you guys will know the information, the webinar is being recorded and that it will be posted to our YouTube channel, and that link will be circulated to those who have registered to participate. So you can look out in your emails for that coming up shortly.
Walter, you have one question in the chat regarding what is the difference between a chart and a map?
All right. Thanks for that question, Corey. Well, maps represent geographic data. A chart doesn't necessarily have to represent that, unless you mean charts that are aerial charts or charts for navigation purposes. I suppose that's what Corey means. So I think the main difference between those is that maps are often much more simple, and the audience is a little bit different. So for example, your charts may require an expert to interpret them. Maybe somebody who has some training to identify what the bearings mean and so on. But maps are a little bit more simplified because the target audience generally is just regular folk who want to see, say, map of population. Now, it doesn't take an expert to be able to read a map that has that information on it, but charts probably require persons with a little bit more knowledge of a particular field to be able to say what exactly the chart is showing in terms of bearings or flight patterns and stuff like that, or the depth and so on. So those are a little bit more technical, but in general, maps are more geared towards the general everyday person, for them to be able to see it and interpret it very easily. I hope I answered the question. Well, guys, it's 11:17 and we're supposed to finish at 11 o'clock, so I'm not gonna keep anybody any longer. Thanks for coming. We'll post the recording on our YouTube channel, and then we'll email that link out to everybody. So you'll get that in short order. Thanks again for joining, and couldn't have had this without you guys. So thanks again.